And so he began. And he began with that section that begins in 1 Kings 19. But to understand that, you have to understand some of the background behind that. Now, you remember from your biblical history, King David united the peoples together. And that one kingdom stayed together through Solomon's reign. But during the time of Solomon's sons, David's grandsons, that was fractured in two. So Israel was in the north and Judah was in the south. In the 9th century, the king of Judah became King Ahab. He came in about 873, thank you, 873, and left about 853, so he ruled for about 20 years. Now, during that time, he tried to bring together resources that would solidify that kingdom and make its existence go on forever. And to do that, he began to make a number of alliances. And one of those alliances was with one of his neighbors, and he married the queen, the daughter of one of the kings, and really we're talking about kings now, but that was their term. These people were more like mayors of our cities, really. The kings, and began to build that relationship. This queen was named Jezebel, probably the most infamous queen in the Old Testament. And with her coming, she brought her worship practices. She brought her fertility cult, the worship of Baal. And the worship of Baal began to be very popular, mostly through her influence. And more people began to go and worship Baal and give up worshiping God, until finally God spoke to one of God's prophets. Now remember, a prophet is not quite like what we mean today. Today we say prophet, and we usually think of somebody who's going to foretell the future. No, an Old Testament prophet was someone who was a spokesman for God, someone who spoke for God. And certainly that prophet might tell some things like, if you don't do this, God says this is going to happen to you. But his purpose was not to foretell the future, as much as it was to speak for God. And the prophet Elijah arose, and God said to Elijah, go and tell the people there will be a drought. Now, 1972, remember those days over in Southern California, any of you were around? That was one of the worst droughts I could ever remember. I mean, over there, people would come from other states and say, oh, I want to live in a place where they have 4 seasons. Well, we had 4 seasons. Drought, fire, flood, and earthquake. So we knew what that was. And then in the midst of this drought, Elijah challenges the prophets of Baal, probably these were the priests of Baal, to come up on Mount Carmel with him and say, let's have a contest. I'll make an altar to my God, you make an altar to your God, and let's see which one the true God is. And so the prophets from Baal come up there and they make this altar, and they do all they can, and there were 450 of them, 450 to 1. And up there on the mountain they carry on and nothing happens. So Elijah tells the servants, okay, bring the meat and put it on the altar, and now get some water, some jugs of water, big jugs of water, and pour it over there. And sure enough, out of nowhere, this big bolt of lightning comes, and the whole thing is on fire, and rain comes, and the drought ends. Well, the people, and I think this is, a bit logical in some respects, the people all get together and they decide they're going to kill off the prophets of Baal, which I think is really a way of saying we're going to leave that fertility cult worship and come back and worship the one true God. Well, this so upsets Jezebel when she learns that they've killed off the 450 prophets that she says, I'm going to do to Elijah what all the people did to my prophets. I'm going to kill him. So Elijah takes off and runs, and he begins to run south. And he takes a servant with him, but by the time they get down to the borderline, down to Beersheba, he decides to leave that servant and say, you stay here, I'm going on by myself. And that's where this reading from 1 Kings 19 comes in this morning. He runs and runs and runs, until he reaches a plain, and I think we've probably all seen. And finally, he throws himself down underneath the tree, just utterly exhausted. And he says, Lord, my life is done. You might as well take my life. I'm just finished. Well, Kenny said, you know, that sounds like depression to me. Sounds like somebody who's depressed. And he said, I think this story tells us something about how we can treat people who are depressed. And so the great pastor began to unfold the story. Now, Elijah's laying there under this tree, just thoroughly done in. And out of nowhere comes an angel. Now, remember what an angel is? An angel is, in Old Testament terms, what we quite think of angels today in our pictures of them. This was the presence of God, and it could be a male or female, but this was the presence of God in that place. And the angel comes and brings Elijah food and drink. And Elijah says, no, I don't want to do that. No, you've got to eat something, you've got to drink something, because you have to go on. There's more that you have to do. And so Elijah eats a little bit, and he falls down asleep again. And the angel mercifully lets him sleep for a while, and then comes back and says, look, you've got to eat and drink. And finally he eats and drinks, and he goes on, and he goes up to Mount Horeb. Now notice it, Mount Carmel, Mount Horeb. I'll let you biblical exegetes have some time to think about that. That is a very interesting kind of coincidence. It goes from one mountain to another mountain. So he goes up on the mountain, and up on the mountain he finds a cave, and he throws himself into this cave. Now, sisters and brothers, that's so important for us. Kenny said, you know, this is the way it is in life, this with someone who's depressed, and I think this gives us some clues about how we can help someone who's distressed or has another kind of mental illness. And that is, first of all, when somebody comes in to see me, the first thing I ask them is, you know, how are you sleeping? How are you doing? Are you getting enough sleep? I think today, with some of the things we know now, Kenny might also have asked, are you sleeping too much? Are you, kind of crawling in your bed and just staying there? Are you sleeping too much? And so, sometimes I tell people to go home and get 3 good nights sleep in a row and come back and see me. And you'd be surprised how much that helps people to come back and say, hey, we're feeling fine, we feel much better. Or what about your nutrition? The angel comes and says, you need to eat something. Well, nutrition is a very important part. And remember, this was 1972. And Kenny said, you'd be surprised how many people I see today who have terrible nutrition and eat terribly. We're talking to a teenager today. My teenage granddaughter went to McDonald's 3 times in 2 days. So it's even worse today, I think. So anyway, he said, I ask people about their nutrition, and sometimes change in diet and change in nutrition, and they begin to take better care of themselves. They begin to get some exercise. But then that image of this one who throws himself into the cave, and boy, isn't that our experience with those we know who've been seriously depressed. It's like they're in a cave, and it's hard. It's hard. But when he's in a cave, he's up there in the mountain, Elijah cries out. And Kenny, the wise pastor who was, said, that's what we need to encourage people to do. If you're feeling seriously depressed, cry out for help. Talk to your doctor. Talk to your pastor. Talk to a psychologist. Talk to a trusted friend. Cry out for help. That's what you need to do. And that's hard. That's really, really hard. And it's really, really hard for those of us who have a loved one who has mental illness. Getting them to cry out, to reach out for help is so hard. Oftentimes this is a long, difficult process. I don't think any psychotherapist I know would ever say that asking anybody to change is easy. It takes a tremendous amount of courage, both on the part of the patient and the psychotherapist. I don't think that's ever easy, and it's hard sometimes. But sometimes those crises come, and we get an opportunity And that crisis will open them to new help. And that cry out is, Lord, things can't get any worse, so I'm going to cry out for help. A few weeks ago, we had some of the officers from the Tucson Police Department come, and they talked about some new training that officers are getting in crisis intervention training. In fact, that program has become a model that is now being used by other cities around the country. And I think that's a marvelous thing. I think this started here in Tucson, and I think it started after Gabrielle Gifford's shooting and others. And you know, I think that really caused the police department to begin to consider, how could we do this better? So if you have a neighbor, you have a friend, have a loved one who's having a hard time, maybe that neighbor who comes next door and says, hey, I don't know what to do. Charlie's sitting there in this chair and he's talking about ending it all, and I know he's got a 45 up on his shelf in the closet. I don't know what to do. Call for a crisis intervention training officer, CIT, those letters, CIT. After the service, we're going to have some folks from the ICS, from Interfaith Community Services, who will be here, and Dr. Veda Kowalski will be here, and they'll have a table, and she'll have some resources that are available. During our adult ed discussion today, Scott Whitley will be with us from NAMI, from the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and he'll be presenting a program. I hope, you know, it's a bit of a schlep to, you know, say we got an hour here, what are we going to do to come back at 10:30, I mean 11:30. But he's going to be presenting a program on everything you wanted to know about mood disorders but were afraid to ask. And Scott will also have a table between the services out here with some information from NAMI, which is another marvelous resource for our community that most people don't know about. And sometimes it's hard to climb through all of the resources that are available and through all of a number of things. And the folks at NAMI can help with that. So I hope you'll make acquaintance with them and know about them. So in the midst of this, Elijah cries out for help. And in the midst of this cry is not only a cry for help, it's almost a complaint. You know, it's almost a time of complaining. Said, God, I must have done something wrong. You know, why wasn't I able to change everybody's mind about this? You told me to do this, and I couldn't do it, and I'm just awful, and it's just awful, and this must be my fault. How common is that for people who are mentally ill, to feel as if this must be my fault? I must be a morally degenerate person. I think that's one of the good things about terribly bright, well-accomplished people writing their memoirs and sharing their thoughts and memories of their own struggles with mental illness. We see these are very bright people. College professors, ministers. I'm so glad that we had Mary Alice Doe with us a few weeks ago, the Disciples of Christ minister who came and talked about her struggles with mental illness and her experience in the church. All of these people were saying, no, you've got to give up that old thinking, that old way of believing. You know, even physicians. Kathy Riley, who is a British physician, talks about her experience with her depression and spending time thinking, this is not because I'm just not a good enough Christian. Now, these are not people who are people we would normally think of as having these problems, but we all have them, and all our lives are touched by them. That's why I think that statistic that maybe you noticed up there, that 62% of all adults are touched by mental illness through their lives, through themselves or through someone they know. I think that's low. I think that's on the low side. I really do. I think it's higher than that. I think all is. I think it's up. But now there's another portion of this story that Kenny didn't mention when he talked to us about it that morning, and that's the angel. Remember, the angel comes and says to Elijah, hey, you got to get something to eat. You got to take care of yourself. You've got a further journey to go on. You've got to get up and get going. And the angel comes. And I think that's the place where the church is. I think we can be those who bring caring and hope to people. I can't tell you how many times people came to me and said, you know, the church was the most important element in my healing. I really think that. And I really think that that's an important part that we need to keep in mind. I can't tell you how many times people have come and told me, I'm so glad the church has a Stevens ministry, because it was one of the Stevens ministers that I could call up and talk to at any moment. Or I'm glad that the church was here because I knew I could come and see the pastor and talk with the pastor when it would take weeks for me to get an appointment with a psychiatrist. So that's important. And so finally, the angels portion of that is there. But there's another portion of the story, too, that we haven't mentioned. As Elijah is laying there in the midst of this grief, God says to him, go outside and God will be there. The presence of God will be there. And this is the story that most of us know about Elijah. So Elijah goes out, and what happens? There's an earthquake, fire, wind, heavy rain. God is not in. But then there is utter silence. This is so important, I think, because when we have any kind of illness, serious illness, don't we just really want something to come along and cure us like that? You know, I want that magic pill. I want somebody to instantly touch me. I want the good fairy to come and walk me with her wand. I want to be like that. It takes a long time. It takes a lot of support. It takes a lot of continuing care. And that's hard. That's very, very hard. Oftentimes people who are mentally ill need to balance their medication in an extremely complex way. And it's difficult to get that kind of combination, that cocktail, as Catherine Green McCrites calls it, and get that treatment ready and get that in the right place. And it often takes various kinds of treatment, as Mary Alice Doe told us. I think that's important, and it's important for the church to be those angels who come and stand with the person and say, yeah, you're going now. You got to stay on this. You got to keep it up. I'll help you get to your appointment. I'll take you. I'll be here with you. It's important for us. Those acts of compassion by the church and the church members are important. But there's even more that I think we need to be doing. And I'm going to get one of my props here. You know, we have a mental health ministry team in our church. And they have as their purpose, one of their purposes, to educate and reduce the stigma of mental illness. And believe me, as enlightened as we are today, that's still a major factor. One of the things our team has done is to present a program that the crisis intervention trained police officers have undertaken called Mental Health First Aid. And we've offered a mental health first aid class for adults and for youth, and or really for those who work with youth. And I hope we will probably be doing this in the future. I hope you will keep that in mind and think about this. As I said, I think the number of us who will touch the lives of someone who's mentally ill is far greater than we can imagine. Their second second charge is to assist by offering resources for those with mental illness and their loved ones. In the past, we've had a mental health support group. We have a mental health book discussion group currently, and I know that we're going to be doing more and more in that area. And the final one is the one that I really don't want to miss, and that's to advocate for more mental health programs and treatments. You know, there's so little there's so much more that we need to be doing. Catherine Green McCreight, who's interesting, she's a college professor, teaches at Yale, she's an Episcopal minister, and yet she suffered from this tremendous time of depression. She wrote a book called Darkness is My Only Companion. And she revised that, and I read the revision after it came out last July, but she didn't change some of the statistics, and I promised myself that I wasn't going to spend a whole lot of time just quoting statistics this morning. But she called up some statistics from 1999. That's 15 years ago, so you can only multiply this. She said that every year the government estimates that it costs us as Americans $200 billion.